Back in January of this year, the FMCSA released a damning report pretty much calling to ban lease purchase programs. Now, more specifically, the FMCSA wanted Congress to pretty much ban motor carriers from offering lease purchase options to truck drivers. But like I said, this happened January of this year. It's pretty much almost August at this point. So, in my opinion, it's safe to say that this program is not going to go anywhere anytime soon. But on this channel, I do want to call out the shenanigans in the trucking industry. Now, despite lease purchase programs having well over a 90% failure rate, they remain a very attractive option for truck drivers. And personally, I've always wondered this. However, trucker Richie Rich, somebody who has been leasing trucks for years, pretty much explains why that is, why he wants to lease trucks as opposed to being a company driver. And simply put, he states that companies just don't pay drivers enough.
I've been a lease operator for 10 years, I say. I did company for like 2 years. I did Stevens Company. And the question was asked, why are you just doing company? why are you a lease driver? Why are you just doing lease? And I'll be honest with you. Now that I look back on it, the only reason why anybody does lease, right, is because you make more money. And the sad part about the whole thing is these truck companies could pay you better as a company driver, but I feel like they don't.
But my question is this truly the case? Are lease purchase drivers pretty much better off than being a company driver? Because according to that report released by the FMCSA, 200,000 truck drivers, which represents about 5% of the industry altogether, they report that while being involved in these lease purchase programs, they have experienced financial and professional hardship. After all, I did cover a story last week about a truck driver by the name of Party Hard Trucking and Traveling. He's also a YouTuber. He worked at a company called Coral Trucking or Cobra Inc. out of Chicago, Illinois. As his name suggests, he loves to travel, Party Hard Trucking and Traveling. So he was on vacation in the DR, Dominican Republic. Yeah, he was on vacation. And while on vacation, he discovered that his paycheck was wiped out. They pretty much stole his paycheck. And of course, he crashed out over it on a live stream.
They took my money again. Yo, listen, they charged me $550. Guess what? They said I brought the truck back with less fuel and depth than they gave it to me with. Man, come on with that bullshit. Bro, they're just making up shit. They charged me for a whole week of having the truck, even though I only had it 5 days. We're gonna play my money like that, man. You did this shit again. But either you give my mother money, I'm gonna put out your company with your DOT name, and I'm gonna send that shit to DOT.
Now, in case you missed it, the video is gonna be in the description box down below. But like I said, he worked for the company Coral/Cobra Trucking out of Chicago, Illinois. Now, the company does offer quote-unquote company driver positions in addition to their leasing options. And in my opinion, the company drivers that work there are misclassified. But I went into details about it in the last video. Go check that out. But to be honest with you, these scams in trucking, I wish that they were just limited to Chicago, Illinois, but unfortunately, this is a nationwide epidemic. Now, we have certain companies in America, which I like to refer to as the usual suspects, that have been guilty of misclassifying their truck drivers in the past. And one of the usual suspects is the beloved and cherished Prime Inc. Back in 2019, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of truck driver Dominic Oliveira in a landmark case, and basically, this case exposed how Prime Inc. misclassified him as an independent contractor. He was on a lease purchase agreement, yes, but Prime Inc. dictated where he went, what loads he hauled, and how he did the job. And that does not make him an independent contractor. That makes him an employee. But instead of, owning up to their mistakes and, being held accountable, Prime Inc. basically tried to block him from suing the company. And basically, this process is known as forcing arbitration. Essentially, what that means is that since he was an independent contractor, independent contractors can't go to the courts and sue. Instead, they have to handle matters privately. Now, this process process usually favors the big corporations involved, not necessarily the driver, but the Supreme Court ruled that truck drivers and other transportation workers are actually exempt from this federal arbitration agreement. So let's just take a look at that for ourselves.
Just an everyday guy trying to make it in life. I started out over $750. $750 paycheck they took just because they wanted to. And it went somewhere I never expected.
The companies not only don't pay them what they said they were going to pay them, they start taking out the company's own business expenses from the worker's paycheck. So they'll deduct from your paycheck the truck that you're driving for the company. They'll call it a lease and deduct it from your paycheck.
Didn't throw the red flags until I was considered an independent, misclassified independent.
Companies across industries have started to call their workers independent contractors to get out of all of the regulation that ensures that workers are paid and treated fairly.
That's when I told them I quit. That Friday, I was heading to Florida, and I opened up my statement. It said there's no money, negative balance.
Forced arbitration was keeping drivers out of court. It was keeping them from banding together to fight these practices that were hurting everyone. And Prime tried to compel arbitration when Dominic sued. Prime said, hey, we have this arbitration clause. And the statute that they were using to do this is the Federal Arbitration Act. And we said, hey, this statute has an exemption. This exemption is for transportation workers. And you know who are transportation workers? Truck drivers are transportation workers.
Now, granted, this happened about 6 years ago. Now, it's been some time, obviously, since that's passed, and I'm pretty sure Prime Inc. patched up any loopholes in their contracts to avoid situations like this from ever happening again. But that doesn't mean that lease purchase programs are not a scam. They still are a scam. And these programs are very, very dangerous if you have bad credit, if you're low income, or if you are a foreign truck driver. For example, we have companies that are operating on the West Coast, and I'll list them right here. They probably do look familiar to you, but yes, they operate out of the West Coast, and they have also been exposed for misclassifying truck drivers. So once again, this is a pattern. These drivers were misclassified as independent contractors. The companies controlled the routes, the schedules, the pricing, and they pretty much banned these drivers from working elsewhere. And if they, speaked out about it, if they, stood up for what was right, the companies would retaliate against them and fire them. Now, the good news is that, these trucking companies, they were exposed, they were sued, and the truck drivers were in fact paid out. But once again, that doesn't mean that, lease purchase programs are not a scam, because stuff like this still happens in the industry every single day. Truck drivers are still being manipulated and taken advantage of. And to be honest with you, what's sad about all of this is, even though the studies are right there, the program has a 90% failure rate, truck drivers who feel like they don't, have any other options, they still enter in these agreements thinking that, ownership is the outcome of it, when once again, it's a 90% failure rate. And according to the FMCSA's lease purchase and task force, there is no correlation between leasing a truck and eventually owning it. Instead, you're stuck with a high weekly payment, and a lot of times you can't even afford it. We've been in a trucking recession for several years, but more than just a second. Trucker Richie Rich, he also made a video exposing how, Prime Inc., they actually have a record number of trucks currently sitting right now that are not being leased out. They're just sitting because, I guess truck drivers are finally waking up and realizing that this lease purchase thing is nonsense. It's hoopla. But yeah, let's just take a look at that.
Somebody said Prime got like 80 trucks sitting there idle. And I was looking at the Success Leasing, and I was like, damn, they do, yo. I'm going to tell you something. Back in the day, they couldn't keep a truck on the list. They had a waiting list. They had people actually sitting in hotels waiting weeks to get a truck. Now they couldn't give a truck away. And these are all brand new trucks. I mean, look how expensive these trucks are. $1,275 plus $100 APU, right? That's $1,300 in fixed costs. Not to mention the insurance and registration and all the tags. That's $1,600 to $1,700 a week.
And to be quite honest, I think the solution to all of this is really to increase driver wages. That's pretty much basically what, Trucker Richie Rich was getting at the beginning of the video. Company drivers just simply aren't paid enough, so people turn to leasing as, an alternative to make more money. And like I said, truck drivers, they're exempt from overtime despite there actually being, bills, circulating in Congress that would essentially help truck drivers in getting overtime. But we all know how that goes. That's not gonna, pass right now. And I remember watching earlier this week a video on Alex Mai's channel, the Mother Trucker channel. He said that, right now, OIDA and the Teamsters are pretty much going back and forth with the ATA in Congress right now about, the state of trucking, the future of trucking, how truck drivers are basically mistreated. And I guess we'll see what happens. But like I said, I don't see anything coming from it, just like with the overtime for truck drivers.
ATA stating that trucker shortage, because there's just not enough drivers on the road. And then Teamsters and OIDA is like, no, that's not the case. If you pay the drivers right, they will stay.
This includes enhancing driver training, improving restroom access, and combating freight fraud. More broadly, efforts to expand truck parking capacity, eliminate the federal law that prevents truckers from being guaranteed overtime pay, and stopping the unsafe increases of truck size and weights. Large carriers will oppose OIDA's efforts to prohibit predatory lease-to-own scams. By design, these leave truckers broke and empty-handed.
And to be quite honest with you, even if we were to increase the wages, we see what's going on with trucking right now. I mean, UPS is trying to buy out truck drivers because apparently they're being paid too much, and the contract negotiations that were made back in 2023 were actually unsustainable. In addition to that, we have the acceleration of AI, and recently Governor Jared Polis out of Colorado vetoed a bill that would have pretty much limited AI and regulate AI, but no, he vetoed it, and pretty much companies have the green light to make innovations that would be disruptive for the trucking industry. So yeah, even if we were to increase the wages and pretty much end lease purchase programs for drivers, I just think that eventually that's just going to accelerate AI. So, if you're somebody out there that's involved in a lease purchase program, I hope that you're making a lot of money, you're saving your money, you're investing your money, and I hope the gravy train continues because even though I do feel like you're being scammed, I mean, it's neither here nor there. But you know what? That's all I really have for you today. Hopefully this video did a good job. I don't think it did a good job at convincing you that, leasing a truck is in fact a scam. It's very exploitative. Avoid leasing altogether. And I know I'm going to have naysayers in my comments that tell me that I'm wrong. I don't know what I'm talking about. And maybe you are right. I don't know what I'm talking about. But hey, if you enjoy content like this, hit the like button, comment, rate, share, and subscribe. I'm Tasia Woods, and I'll see you next time.